Namaskar. Welcome to this session. We are commencing the discussion of Ashtanga Yoga. And the first of the Yamangas is Yama. And first of the Yama is Ahimsa. So we are going to consider Ahimsa. Now, since we are going to arrive at unusual meaning of Ahimsa, we will retain this as a technical term and not venture to translate it as non-injury, non-killing, etc. At the outset, let me tell you that we are all aware of this term and concept Ahimsa in normative sciences. In moral ethical sciences, we hear about it. And more often it is felt that it should be only taught to children. Because the children need to be taught morality, ethicality. And that's why one tends to overlook at the principle of Ahimsa. Rather, one tends to overlook at the very concept of morality, ethicality in the light of practicality of life. So, point is that we are all used to this non-killing, non-injury, or what is called as Ahimsa, only through normative sciences, the moral, ethical sciences or morality, ethicality sciences. But we are now going to understand the same concept in a broader perspective and in a deeper perspective in Dharma-Niti or the Achara Dharma-Niti Pranali. So this is, as I've been telling you, it is something that can be called as ethico-religious principle, although English word doesn't convey the ethos of Yamas and Niyamas when Patanjali mentions it. Patanjali is mentioning these principles to practitioners of yoga and practitioners of yoga on all planes. Adhamadhikari, Madhyamadhikari, Uttamadhikari. So try to understand the oceanic depth to the concept of Ahimsa, which you would hardly find in normative sciences and in moral ethical sciences. By the way, so we are going to hear about this Ahimsa in yoga, in a philosophical system, and therefore we must have a fresh approach towards this rather than deeming that we know it as moral ethical principle. Now this Ahimsa is coming as vrata. In morality, ethicality, we don't practice all those norms as vrata or as vows. Again, vow is not a proper term. It doesn't have the cultural import the word vrata has. And therefore, these words must be retained and we should not venture to translate them because we don't translate the essence. We only translate the word. So, vrata. So, ahimsa is being mentioned as a vrata and not as a moral ethical practice, which one should try to practice as much as possible in practicality of life and in business dynamics of life. So that is the another point of difference that we have to understand. This is ahimsa vrata. And of course, all the following Satya, Asteya, Brahmacharya, Aparigraha, they are all vratas. So they have a different purport and import and essence. So this must be understood at the outset. And the principle of Ahimsa mentioned here scores a distinction. It is because it is postulated that this Ahimsa vrata is basis of all the other four vratas, namely Satya, Asteya, Brahmacharya, Aparigraha. So here we get another clue that it's a unique perspective of Ahimsa. In moral ethical sciences, the non-injury, non-killing doesn't become basis for the rest. So they are separate practices. Practicing non-killing, non-injury, practicing truthfulness, practicing non-stealing, practicing celibacy, practicing non-hoarding. We don't trace root the ahimsa as the non-killing as the root there. So there are five different normative principles. They are not related to each other. There is no relationship between the five normative principles, but it is expressed here that, and quite explicit here, that ahimsa vrata takes the root place, and from this root, the other vratas are going to sprout. And therefore, it definitely means that ahimsa is unique concept here. And this is, as I said, explicit and express, because Vyasa in his comment he says, Uttare cha Yamas and Niyamas tanmulaha tat siddhi paratayaiva upadiyate. So now understand, it is furthermore that ahimsa is root of Satya, Asteya, Brahmacharya, Aparigraha, Shaucha, Santosha, Tapas, Swadhyaya, Ishvara. Further, it can be extended that it is root for entire Ashtanga. Even the following limbs such as Pranayam, Pratyahar, Dharana, Dhyan, Samadhi, ahimsa is something very foundational. And not only foundational, but the root. There is a big difference between mentioning that ahimsa is foundation of all and ahimsa is root of all. So, it is quite explicit that ahimsa is root and everything else sprouts in Ashtanga Yoga from ahimsa. So ahimsottar Yamas and Niyamas, they are all ahimsa moolaka. And ahimsa siddhi also is because of those. You cannot be perfecting ahimsa by ahimsa. For ahimsa to be perfected, accomplished, the Satya, Asteya, Brahmacharya, Aparigraha, Shaucha, Santosha, Tapas, Swadhyaya, Ishvara, all these would be constituting the success and accomplishment of ahimsa. So this also gives us a kind of basis to understand that this ahimsa is totally different. Because in normative principle of ahimsa, there is not even reckoning of Satya, Asteya, Brahmacharya, Aparigraha, and not at all Shaucha, Santosha, Tapas, Swadhyaya, Ishvara. We can't find even remote relationship between the niyamas such as Shaucha, Santosha, Tapas, Swadhyaya, Ishvara, and ahimsa. So, not to confuse with the moral ethical principle of ahimsa that we are familiar with in normative sciences and ahimsa that is being mentioned in yoga. Ahimsa being mentioned by Patanjali in yoga philosophy and the Acharya Dharma-Ni Pranali of Patanjalas. So, certain things should be clear right at the outset. Why am I am saying that Ahimsa is a unique term here and it should be maintained as Ahimsa and not render it into any other language. Because in any other language, if you render it, there won't be even remote relationship, connection between the rest of the yamas, Satya, Asteya, Brahmacharya, Aparigraha, and of course not at all niyamas. There will be no relationship with Shaucha, Santosha, Tapasvadhyaya, Ishvaradhan, etc. What Shaucha is required to be practicing moral ethical ahimsa? What Swadhyaya is required to practice moral ethical ahimsa? Or the normative ahimsa? We don't find any slightest trace or clue that there can be relationship. However, here ahimsa is said to be root and not just the foundation. So I repeat, try to understand what is root. And we can understand what is root in botanical life very well. So, anyway, so Vyasa makes it clear right at the outset as to how the Ahimsa vrata is totally different from Ahimsa practice. Ahimsa as a norm. So, Ahimsa is accomplished by Satya, Asteya, Brahmacharya, Aparigraha, Shaucha, Santosha, Tapasvadhyaya, Ishvaradhan. Now try to imagine what kind of Ahimsa this might be. That it is only completed, accomplished or perfected by rest of the 4 yamas and all the 5 niyamas. So it entails some thought investment to understand as to what must be this Ahimsa vrata of Patanjali. And he also, Vyasa clearly says that in order to describe Ahimsa completely, the Satya, etc. are mentioned. That means the concept of Ahimsa will not be clear unless you understand the concept of Satya, Asteya, Brahmacharya, Aparigraha, Shaucha, Santosha, Tapasvadhyaya, Ishvaradhan. So this Ahimsa is constituted by all the 4 rest of the yamas and the 5 niyamas to come. So it's a unique composition of Ahimsa which Patanjali is postulating. You won't get this Ahimsa in any other text, any other normative science, any other normative philosophy. But this is unique here. So Patanjali Ahimsa is totally different than Ahimsa that might come in Manu Dharma Shastra, it might come in Smruti, it can come in Itihas Puranas, it can come in all those normative sciences which are advocating good conduct in life. We will not be able to construe this Ahimsa by understanding Ahimsa that comes in all the normative sciences of the East or of the West, of the ancient times or medieval times or modern times. We will not be able to construe this Ahimsa vrata which Patanjali is going to mention. So, and he further says, in order to purify the Ahimsa vrata, in order that there is no shortcoming, no taint, no dent, in order that Ahimsa is genuine, This ahimsa needs assistance of Satya, Asteya, Brahmacharya, Aparigraha, Shaucha, Santosha, Tapasvadhyaya, Ishwar Pranidhana. So they will purify the ahimsa vrata, they will make it immaculate, faultless, not only complete, but qualitatively as well accomplished. Not just in quantity of ahimsa, that somebody practices a lot of ahimsa or somebody practices complete ahimsa. It is not just volume, it's quality as well. So that's why he says, Tad avatada rupayaiva upadiyante. To make that ahimsa nirmala, to make the ahimsa faultless, the Satya etc., Yamas and Shaucha etc., Niyamas are to be practiced. So now we can again imagine as to how this ahimsa might be different, that which needs assistance of Satya, Asteya, Brahmacharya, Aparigraha, Shaucha, Santosha, Tapas, Swadhyaya, Ishwar Pranidhan in its structuring. So we have to take these blocks for structuring the ahimsa, for the ahimsa to be pure, ahimsa to be genuine, ahimsa to be nirmala. So Vyasa has gone all out in explaining this ahimsa. Now why is this said? Because make note of the fact that basically it is coming in Anushtana mode of Ashtanga. If it is to be Anushtanam, it's a different practice. It's a different framework. And then it is Dharma. Ahimsa is Dharma. Satyadi Yamas are Dharma. Shauchadi Niyamas are Dharma. It is Dharma Pranali. Again, for which there is no English word or word in any other language. The point is, we have to, at the very outset, understand these yamas, or ahimsa particularly, is totally different because it comes as yoganga and it comes as anusthana and it comes as vrata. Therefore, the framework of ahimsa would be totally different. Otherwise, ahimsa might be practiced by others in the path of dharma, adhyatma, paramartha. But when it comes to yoganga anushtan, yama would be totally different. Anyway, I have to leave this for everybody's imagination as to what this might be. You can't expect me to give every detail of it as to this is how it is. So basically we have to tell you it is not as you think, or it is not as you might think, or it is not as everyone thinks. It is unique. So, being vrata, ahimsa being vrata, he quotes from somewhere. स खल्वयं ब्राह्मणो यथा यथा व्रतानि बहूनि समादित्सते तथा तथा प्रमादकृतेभ्यो हिंसा निदानेभ्यो निवर्तमानः ताम एव अवदाद रूपम ahimsa karoti. So he says that it is a quotation. Somebody has said, he says, some acharya has said, as a noble person goes on practicing these vratas, this ahimsa vrata, correspondingly the incidental or out of some carelessness himsa would be slowly set aside. So one will be getting freed from himsa, which is very natural tendency. So one will be freeing from this. So at this point, let me tell you, basically, ahimsa is negation of himsa. And himsa is something which is a very natural tendency of all living creatures. Himsa is a very natural tendency. We don't have to go and learn himsa. So the opposites of all yamas, we don't have to have any practice. We don't need any education. We don't need any training. So, yama, absence of yama, himsa is quite a propensity. We don't need any training, we don't need any advice, we don't need any education about it. It is quite natural. The himsa will be coming quite natural in the human psyche and in life, as a matter of fact, any kind of life. Asatya also doesn't need any academy that you should go and learn about asatya. It is quite natural thing to be speaking untruth and to be conducting oneself untruthfully or truthlessly, untruly. So we don't need any education, we don't need any endeavor, we don't need any practice of it. We don't have to practice how to speak the untruth. We don't need any education for untruth. It's quite spontaneous. So look at the human history and look at ourselves. Let us look at ourselves. We don't need any calibration or any education or qualification to be speaking untruth and to be living truthlessly. It's quite natural. So asatya doesn't need all that. Asteya doesn't need that. Brahmacharya doesn't need education. So these are all natural tendencies. So look at these yamas and the opposites of it. They are our natural tendencies. That's why they are possibly called restraints. Because we are prone to be committing to those, we are in those things, we are in himsa, we are in asatya, we are in steya, we are in brahmacharya, we are in parigraha. So these are natural propensities, natural tendencies. And therefore we have to reform and therefore we have to restrain. And that is why yamas are translated as restraints. So which is something very natural to us. And therefore, the vrata, idea of vrata has come. That means you will observe to be away from it for some time. So vrata can be of a day. Vrata can be of couple of days. Vrata can be of a week. Vrata can be of 9 days. Vrata can be of a fortnight. Vrata can be of a month. So, because we have to take small dosages to be going against our natural propensities and natural tendencies, therefore, there is scheme of vrata in Dharma-shastra. We don't need vrata for something which we are used to doing it. But where we are not used to do and where we are used to do the opposite of it, we need some vows. You don't have to take a vow that I will always speak the untruth, It doesn't need a vow. So you don't have to take a vow to say that I will not speak untruth for 1 day or a week or a month or lifetime. You don't have to say that I will have to take vow to be untruthful. It doesn't need vrata. Because that is the slope on which we are, and we are going to be going by the slope, and that's our tendency. But we required vrata for what is opposite of our natural tendencies, natural propensities. So Yama means something which is to go against our nature, and therefore the vratas have come in. So the statement that we saw just now, which was a quotation given by Vyasa, स खल्वयं ब्राह्मणो यथा यथा व्रतानि बहूनि समादित्स्यते तथा तथा प्रमादकृतेभ्यो हिंसा निदानेभ्यो निवर्तमानः ताम एव अवदादरूप अहिंसा करोति. So as and as the vrata, the vows become more reinforced, one will be slowly weaned away from these natural tendencies of himsa, asatya, steya, brahmacharya, aparigraha, ashaucha, etc., etc. So Vyasa has quoted from some agama about this. So the point is that we will be reformed because we will be not flowing on the slope. This is what the vratas are practiced for, so that we are not reeling down the slope of tendencies. Now, this ahimsa vrata is so vast and so pervasive, and if it is adhered to absolutely, completely, in totality, all the dharma vratas are included. So another dimension for our thinking, that if your ahimsa is accomplished or you are completely in it, you are already in Satya, you are already in Asteya, you are already in Brahmacharya, you are already in Aparigraha, you are already in Shaucha, Santosha, Tapasya, Adhyaya, Sharvanidhan. That is why it is said to be root kind of Yama. So if it is immaculate, if the ahimsa vrata is immaculate, other vratas are all included in it. This is how this ahimsa dharma is. By having that one, you almost can have everything. That's why ahimsa paramo dharmaha is what Mahabharata has said. So ahimsa is going to help you accomplish your rest of the yamas. So it is ahimsa vrata which is going to give you satyata, asteyata, the brahmacharyata, aparigrahata. All those will be accomplished by perfecting ahimsa vrata. So this is what Vyasa is trying to impress on our minds. And you can find such mention in Itihas and Purana and Dharma Shastra. I recall Mahabharata in Shanti Parva 245.18 and 19. 2 verses. It beautifully describes how ahimsa vrata is all pervasive in Dharma-Ni, in dharma, in practice of dharma. Yatha nagapade anyani padani padagaminam sarvani eva apidhiyante padajatani kaunjare evam sarvam ahimsayam dharmartha apidhiyate. So what is this passage from Mahabharata telling us? Just as all other footsteps are covered by the footsteps of huge elephant, so also all dharma and all artha are upheld by Ahimsa. Ahimsa will help you uphold all the dharma and artha purushartha. That is what the verse of the two verses of Mahabharata are telling us. So that is again some matter for us to conceive and construe as to what ahimsa is being mentioned. It is not just non-killing and non-injury, but much more than that. Now let's move to next point here. Basically, ahimsa is a vrata. Ahimsa is a vrata, and ahimsa vrata is twofold. As Patanjali mentions in his scheme, Anuvrata and Mahavrata. This was referred to earlier. Atomic vow and universal vow. So it will be utopian to think of practicing Mahavrata or universal vow unless we have been administered or unless we have taken the dosages of Anuvrata, atomic vows. So, because it is vrata, we need to take recourse to atomic vows, small and infant dosages of yamas and niyamas gradually, and then we can increase the dosage and then it can become more pervasive. The point is, Anuvrata and Mahavrata have come in Patanjali's scheme of yamas and niyamas. The Mahavrata has been directly mentioned, but it has been so defined that you also understand the characteristics of atomic vows or Anuvrata. So he defines Mahavrata in such a way that you will also be able to deduce, extrapolate as to what is Anuvrata. So marvelously, he has defined Mahavrata. Of course, we will be seeing that in course of time. So he directly refers to Mahavrata and indirectly mentions Anuvrata. And the Anuvrata is so important because then everyone can be taking recourse to it. It is such a small dose that everyone can take recourse to it. It doesn't become out of reach. That is why in Sanatana Dharma, the concept of Anuvrata is there. It helps man. Worldly man is like an infant for spiritual process. Worldly man, worldly human being is like infant for spiritual purpose, paramartha. And therefore, like the child is always given a small dosage of whatever is given to it as medicine, or even the food, the infant morsel is always small. You will not feed the child with a tablespoon while you might be eating on your dining table with a tablespoon. So, that's why the concept of Anuvrata is a great endowment of Sanatana Dharma, ageless Dharma. So it doesn't become too much. It doesn't become cumbersome. It doesn't become unbearable. So that's why in Sanatana Dharma, you don't see this asceticism in which you see in some of the heterodox dharma in India, that sannyas is only mentioned, despite the fact that a common man cannot be adhering to sannyas, but there is superabundance of certain conducts. Atireki, So some of the heterodox religions, you will see that they have such kind of norms and such kind of prescriptions that the common man cannot be practicing it, and it becomes uh, superabundance. So Patanjali, being from Sanatana Dharma, has prescribed both Anuvrata and Mahavrata. Mahavrata has been explicitly defined. Jati, Desha, Kala, Samaya, Anavacheda kind of Mahavrata. Not limited by anything. Time, space, situation, scenario, condition. So in any condition, anywhere, anytime, all the time, everywhere, when it is practiced, it becomes Mahavrata. No exceptions, no relaxations, no compromises. That is Mahavrata. And when you make your vow limited by time, space, situation, scenario, condition, state, etc., then it becomes Anuvrata. And that is the one which common man can embrace. Anuvratas are the ones which sadhakas embrace, common people like you and me embrace, and therefore we can be still practicing dharma because of allowance of anuvrata, acceptance of anuvrata. So, point is Patanjali is administering the sadhakas with tiny dosages of Ahimsa, Satya, Asteya, Brahmacharya, Aparigraha, and not the complete dosages of it, whereby it would be impossible to adhere to yoga, embrace yoga. So, moderate degree of Yamas and Niyamas are also mentioned. Practicable degrees of Yamas and Niyamas are mentioned. Something that is improbable is not mentioned. And that's why the mention of Anuvrata is so important. So it will consider Shaktya Shakyata, Shakya Shakyata, Shakti and Ashakti, Shakyata, that is possibility and impossibility. So those are considered. So it's a very considerate Sanatan Dharma. Otherwise, ahimsa would be impracticable. Now, if you come across that it is unpracticable, then why will you go for it? You won't make even attempts. But infant dosages are available. In Paramartha, you don't have to take a huge pill of spirituality, Adhyatma, Paramartha. We are given small dosages as well. So we must become familiar with a small dosage, then perhaps magnitude can be increased, like medicine is available in different magnitudes. So the magnitude of vratas can be increased as and when you get qualified, as when you become familiar with it, you can definitely increase the dosage. So let me tell you, it is not utopian mention here to practice ahimsa, satya, asteya, brahmacharya, aparigraha. Whatever possible, howsoever possible, to whatever extent possible, whenever possible, wherever possible, we should be practicing those. So much concession is given to a raw beginner. Now you can't expect more liberality than this. And when you are familiar with this, when you have inculcated, when you have ingested, digested it, then you can increase the dosage. So anyway, so Patanjali is not mentioning something that is improbable, impracticable. So that is another thing that we should have considered and which I have considered now. So it is not idealism that Patanjali has even in Yamas and Niyamas. It is not idealism. He says whatever is realistic, practice to that extent. A certain amount of it is realistic. You can certainly practice truth to some extent. You can practice Ahimsa to some extent. You can practice Asteya, Brahmacharya to whatever extent, to some extent. It can be microscopic, it can be infant dose. But that is what we have to commence. So we are given a portal from where we can make our commencement to Yamas and Niyamas rather than mentioning the mountainous Yamas and Niyamas where one will think that, oh, I cannot be scaling. Why venture? So there is no utopian idea behind Yamas and Niyamas here. That is also thing to be considered. Now we are going to discuss as to what is this really Ahimsa. And let us have some understanding as to what is this Ahimsa. And the best way to understand this Ahimsa is look into a wonderful passage that has come in Mahabharata by way of a dialogue between Tuladhara and Jajali. Tuladhara is the preceptor and Jajali is the disciple. And there is a wonderful dialogue between the two which will totally effect a disillusionment in our minds about Ahimsa. Otherwise we have an idea of Ahimsa, that this is Ahimsa, that is Ahimsa, this is how it is Ahimsa, that is how it is Ahimsa. So we have some idea of Ahimsa, so there will be a great amount of disillusionment. It's a wonderful passage. So let me just tell you today this much, that the preceptor of Ahimsa in Mahabharata is going to be a butcher. The butcher is going to explain Ahimsa. So that should have some aspect of surprise for you as to how butcher is going to give discourse which has been recorded in history such as Mahabharata. So we will be trying to understand Ahimsa that Tuladhara has explained to Jajali. But let us do that in our next session. Enough for the time being. Namaskar all of you.